Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. My name is Alicia Carwall, and I'm going to be hosting this webinar. The webinar is titled Parent Participation in IEP Decision Making. And Sarah Stiemsma is here to present for us today. She is a family support specialist from Ask Resource Center. She's also a parent of a child with differing needs, and so she brings a lot of value add to our team. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let Sarah get started on her presentation.
Hello, thank you. So as Alicia stated, I work with Ask Resource Center, and I also am a parent of a 14-year-old son who is diagnosed with autism at age 3. So IEP meetings have been a part of my life for over a decade, and I hope that this presentation is not only going to help educate on the IEP process, but it's also going to be an encouragement to you and to families in being that role of being the educational advocate. Let's go ahead and look at parent participation in IEP decision making. So our learning objectives to start. First of all, hopefully you will grow in your understanding of who is a part of the IEP team. You will learn the parent's role in decision making, and we will also explore some different tips for having successful IEP meetings. So our first learning objective, who is part of the IEP, which stands for Individual Education Program Team. So this information is found on the I3 webpage. So this is the Iowa IDEA, which IDEA stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is an information website. It gives guidance and resources and procedures for both professionals and parents. So that would be another resource that you can look into is I3. So who is part of this team? First of all, parents of the student. So that sometimes has a few questions for people. So instead of going into depth during this webinar, Alicia is going to put into the chat, we have a document called Parent Participation in the IEP Decision Making, and we go in depth in there, the different potential positions that people are in that parenting role. So that will give a little bit of clarification. If you need it, go to that resource and use that to kind of clarify that number one, parents of the student. Number 2 is going to be your regular education teacher. This is also known as the general education teacher. Number 3 is going to be a representative of the public agency. So what that means is often it's going to be a school administrator or somebody working within the school, but it has to be somebody that's able to make necessary decisions that allocate resources and funds. So your representative is going to be somebody that's able to, at that meeting, give permission for the allocation of the resources and those funds if necessary. Number 4 is going to be your special education teacher. Number 5 is going to be an individual who can interpret evaluation results. So if there's an evaluation that took place that's being discussed, there needs to be an individual who can interpret the evaluation results. Now, again, instead of going in depth about who that would, Alicia is going to put into the chat, we have a webinar that we did in the past, Ask an Expert with Megan, and she goes in depth into the role of like a school psychologist and things like that as part of the IEP. So if that is something that you would like more information about, that webinar will give you a lot of clarification on that individual who can interpret evaluation data. Number 6 is going to be, whenever appropriate, the child with a disability. So students under the age of 13 may attend their IEP meeting if the parents in the district and the AEA all agree that it's appropriate. But when we get to students aged 13 to 21, they must be invited to their IEP meeting if it's for the purpose of considering different transition services. So we'll talk a little bit more about transition services, but at the age of 13, we start talking about secondary transition services, and students then should be invited to their IEP meeting. Now, if the student is not able to attend their IEP meeting, then it is up to the district and the AEA to make sure that the students' preferences and their interests are considered in the development of the IEP. So they have a little bit of input that needs to be added into the IEP starting at age 13 and 14. Number 7 is going to be other individuals who have knowledge or special expertise. So this is going to be people like a licensed health professional, a school counselor, a school social worker, a special education consultant, an educational interpreter, an employer, or a private counselor. All right, so we looked over who could fill those roles as part of the IEP team, and now we are going to just do some noted things about that. So first of all, number 1, a person may serve in more than one role. So for example, the special education teacher can also be the district representative, and they could be the person that interprets the evaluation results. So although previously we talked about how there's potentially 7 roles, sometimes the number of individuals that are going to be attending each IEP meeting is going to vary, and sometimes one person will have more than one role. Number 2 is going to be an evaluation. So that's either the initial evaluation or a reevaluation. So if that's part of this IEP team, there must be included an AEA support staff professional. And that's because the determination of the initial and continuing eligibility is an AEA responsibility and their responsibility alone. So while parent input is vital in determining what data needs to be collected during the evaluation, and parents' presence is necessary in reviewing the evaluation data, that eligibility determination is the AEA. So if your IEP team meeting does not include this evaluation portion, then it is not necessarily a requirement that the AEA be present. Quite often they are there and they're in attendance, even if an evaluation and interpreting that evaluation aren't necessary, but not required. Number 3, some more notes. While these next 2 are not maybe as common, it's just things I want to make sure are noted and clarified for you. So number 3, in the case of an eligible individual who receives or is anticipated to receive AEA support services only, an AEA support service provider may serve as the agency representative. So for example, some students only receive speech services through the AEA, and that would be an example of when this would be part of your situation. And then number 4, if the IEP will be implemented in a setting outside of the student's resident district, both the attending and the resident district should be represented at the IEP meeting. So this would be a situation if you are open enrolled to another district, then your home district should also be invited to your IEP meeting. All right, now we're going to use kind of some big terminology, and it's kind of a tongue twister. So we're going to talk about IEP attendance, and then we're also going to talk about something that's called the agreement to excuse attendance at IEP meetings. So IEP attendance by the roles, the people that fill the required roles. And so the required roles are going to be your general education teacher, a special education teacher, the district or AEA representative, and an individual who can interpret evaluation results. If they are unable to attend, then they need to be excused. And there's 2 different situations or 2 different ways that these IEP team members could be excused. One of them would be, number 1, an IEP team member's attendance is not necessary. So this would be something like that member's area of expertise is not being discussed. So for example, you are the speech language pathologist. You may be excused from a meeting where the IEP is only going to be amended in the area of math instruction. Number 2 would be the IEP team member's area of expertise will be discussed and his or her input will be provided in writing. So they will have created a document to share with the team, and they will not be there in person, but their information will be discussed and presented to the team. Whoop, sorry about that. However, in both situations, the parent and the school or the AEA must agree in writing that the team member does not need to attend the IEP meeting. So this agreement or this permission is going to be documented in what's called the Agreement to Excuse Attendance at IEP Meeting form. So that's where the tongue twister comes in. So there's the two reasons why somebody maybe is not going, or how they're not going to be in attendance. And then we have this form that then needs to be filled out. So best practice is that if the parent is going to be asked to sign this agreement to excuse attendance at the IEP meeting form, if they're going to be asked to sign it, they should be contacted by phone or by email prior to the meeting to determine that they are in agreement. Because at that time, if the parent does not agree, so if the parent does not agree that, this person can be absent from the meeting, then the IEP team must reschedule, and they must schedule a time when that IEP team member may be able to attend. So if, however, we don't have the time ahead, if the request is made to excuse at the IEP team meeting and the parent does not agree and is not willing to sign, then the IEP meeting is going to be discontinued and it's going to be rescheduled at a time when the individual in question is able to attend. So it's important to make sure that we have parent consent in a timely manner, because sometimes we are looking at annual review and reevaluation timelines, but really this needs to be something that everybody's in agreement, that we're okay with either one or two, and we're signing that we're allowing the meeting to continue even though the person is not going to be present. Now, one other little note for this is that non-required participants, so we kind of went through our required participants, non-required participants who are part of the team. So for example, let's say the district transportation director is typically somebody that's involved in your meetings. They cannot attend the meeting. Now, they should be providing their input to the team, but you don't have to sign the agreement to excuse attendance at the IEP meeting form for somebody who is not a non-required participant. All right, so second learning objective, we're going to talk about the parent's role in decision making. So the Iowa Procedural Safeguard Manual describes the parent's right to involvement in the IEP process. So Alicia's going to be putting into the chat the Procedural Safeguard Manual. I have my copy here. This is the, this is the newest one out right now. August 2022 is going to be the date at the bottom of it. This is the procedural safeguard. This is the manual that you should be receiving every time that you're having an IEP meeting, when the team is getting together to discuss, because this brochure, this manual is really going to be where you as a parent can go to for information about what are your choices, and what are the next steps that you can take if necessary. So we're going to talk about that in a little while here, but make sure that you have that copy. And if not, the electronic version is being given to you by Alicia, so you can download that and have that. Next, under IDEA law, parents are vital members of the team who should meet at least once a year to either develop, review, or revise the IEP. So let's break that apart a little bit. So when we're talking about developing the IEP, we're talking about that's what happens. The AEA has determined that the evaluation shows eligibility, and the team now develops that initial IEP. So that would be what develop would relate to. Next, we have review. At least annually, the team needs to meet to ensure that the goals are still appropriate. So that annual IEP meeting can just be a review of what's happening. or we can be meeting to revise. And that means at least annually, the team is going to meet and make any necessary changes. So when you're meeting at least once a year, it's going to be under one of those contexts, either the development, the revising, or the reviewing of the IEP. Now, just because we just talked about it has to happen once a year, they're not limited to one time a year. So if any member of the team has concerns, the team can get back together to have a meeting to discuss if there needs to be review, if there needs to be revision. Now, if you as a parent have concerns and you would like to be the one that initiates requesting that the IEP meeting happens, Alicia's going to be putting in the chat, we have a sample letter available that you can use as a template. You can type it out, you can email it, you can send a paper copy to the school. This begins kind of the formal request from you that you would like the IEP team to get back together. You would like to discuss whatever concerns it is that you feel need to be discussed. All right, parents are also essential in a few different areas. Parents are essential in making any educational placement decisions. So sometimes that looks like besides the general education classroom, where is placement being made? Outside of maybe the school building, where would placement be made? Parents are essential in that conversation. Parents are also essential in any meeting where any significant changes to the IEP are going to be discussed. And finally, parents are also essential when we start doing that transition planning and services that start at age 14. So we talked earlier about how at age 13, we're starting to invite students to the IEP meetings when we're talking about transition. If you're new to this term transition, Alicia's going to put in a link. We have a sister site called Transition Iowa that is going to help explain anything that is related to transition services. So these are services at age 14 and above in the state of Iowa. We start talking about transition goals for living, learning, and working. So Transition Iowa will really help you out if that's an area that you need education in. All right, so our learning objective number 3. So tips for having a successful IEP meeting. Now, these are not exclusive. There's so many other tips, but we're just going to kind of go through a few that are really going to be beneficial. So first of all, it can be helpful to prepare a list of questions, concerns, or topics for discussion with the team. So you are your child's best advocate. You know best what needs to happen. You know best how to advocate for your child. So you can create a list. You can share this list with the team prior to the meeting. So a week before, you can say, these are the 3 areas that I would really like to have addressed at the meeting. Give everybody kind of time to come up with ideas and resources and things like that. If you don't get it to them ahead of time, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't come prepared with that list. So often, we think, oh, I'm going to remember. Something new comes up at the meeting and, we spend a lot of time talking about that. We leave the meeting, we realize that the 3 concerns that we really went into never got addressed. So having that written down, having it shared out really helps everybody in the team to ensure that those questions and concerns are addressed. Going to the meeting prepared with your papers and your resources and your documents is just one more way that you as a parent can ensure that you are being the best advocate. You have all of your information, you have it right at hand. You're able to put a pause in the meeting if you need to go and reflect back on something that you want to revisit that you had identified earlier. All very key parts of ensuring that what you feel needs to be accomplished at this meeting is being accomplished. Number 2, have prepared ideas about your child's strengths, interests, and preferences to share. You, as a parent, are likely the only member of the IEP team who's been part of the journey from the start. So you are going to know things that have been tried in the past. You are going to be able to share about things that happen at home that work well. And you're also going to be able to share things that don't work well. So coming again prepared with those pieces of information written down so that you aren't relying on just your memory at that moment of time, but instead have been able to spend some time to think through and really process what you think is important to share out with the team. Number 3, parents can invite anyone that they would like to an IEP meeting. So since IEP meetings can be overwhelming, they can be emotional, they can be full of information, there can be educational terms that you don't fully understand. It can be helpful to have another parent or another person with you. And this can be somebody that just sits with you and knows your child well. It can be somebody that's just a really good support to you. And really, they can help you reflect back on what happened in the meeting. They can also just be an encouragement, somebody that you feel is a support for you as you're going through this IEP meeting. It is courteous for parents to let the school know if you have somebody else that you are inviting to attend. Not necessary. Sometimes it's just to allow to make sure there's enough chairs in the space that the meeting is being held. Number 4, families should never feel bad about asking questions. Schools use acronyms that we don't always understand and have never come upon before in our life. Sometimes there are graphs that you are handed that you do not know how to interpret them, and you really need somebody to talk through what this is showing you. Sometimes there's going to be ideas thrown out there that you really need to have some more information about what that all means and what that all entails. So feel free, stop the meeting, say, I'm going to need some clarification on this issue. Make sure that you're not leaving the meeting with unknown questions. Make sure that you have taken the time within the meeting, have those questions answered, be able to leave knowing what was discussed and knowing what decisions were made. Number 5, it's very helpful before a new IEP meeting to review the previous IEP and any other documentation. Sometimes, we go into the meeting and we think we remember what happened, even if it wasn't a year ago from the last meeting, but it is really helpful just for that refresher. And the IEP team can help you. The AEA can help you. We at Ask Resource can help you if you would like to do a review of your IEP before your next meeting, just so that you can make sure that you have full understanding. If you are asking Ask Resource for assistance, best practice is to always make sure that you ask us a few weeks prior to your meeting. That way we can ensure that we have all the time needed to contact you and have that conversation so that you feel very well equipped to go into that meeting as knowledgeable as possible. And lastly, we're going to have number 6. Know that you have the right to inspect and review records. So if while the meeting is happening, records are being discussed, attendance records, or things that you haven't seen in the past and you haven't had access to, you can request to have access. So it's possible it's something that after the meeting you can head to the office, get a copy of what was being discussed. If not, if it's a document that's going to take a few days to get access to, talk with the team and say, so how many days would be a reasonable amount of time? And then within so many days, anticipate that you'll have access to those records. Sometimes it's also helpful that after the meeting, sending a reminder email to everybody on the team, just saying, following the meeting, I'm anticipating receiving, these documents or these records, just to make sure that you're understanding correctly what they are going to be sharing with you, and they understand kind of the timeline of when you're expecting to have those resources. All right, so this is kind of just some additional information to remember. This is, first of all, going to be when parents must provide permission. So parents must provide permission before an evaluation starts. You're going to have to sign for that. You're also going to have to sign to start the initial IEP services. You will have to sign if you are releasing information to other agencies. You will have to sign to receive electronic communication, and you will also be asked to sign if there's going to be billing to insurance or to Medicaid. Now, please understand that even though you've given consent, you can revoke that consent at any time by just contacting the team, contacting the school, letting them know that you're revoking consent to that. But just for a little bit of clarification, after you have given consent for that initial special education services, there's no requirement for the parents or guardians to sign approval annually for the IEP or for changes to the IEP. So sometimes people contact us and they say, I didn't sign anything for this year's IEP. If it's not the initial IEP, you are not being asked to sign every year after that. So that will be happening without your signature. So next, we have this little paragraph about prior written notice. So prior written notice, it's another document that we have that Alicia is going to put in the chat, that we have kind of some supporting document. And what that prior written notice is it's going to be a written explanation of any proposed or any refused changes to the IEP after they've been discussed at a meeting. But these should be issued before the changes go into effect. So spending some time educating yourself on prior written notice and the role that it plays in the IEP is going to be very beneficial for you as a parent. And the reason for that is because the prior written notice is going to kind of be the tool that you would use as a parent if you would need to then look into your procedural safeguard manual. Again, Alicia had linked that earlier. Anytime that you want to know what rights you have, and this is in regards to every aspect of the special education process. They are going to be housed inside this procedural safeguard manual. And that prior written notice that we just discussed a paragraph above, that's going to be another important tool that's going to be discussed. Now, Mari, next Monday, is going to be going a little bit more in depth into this procedural safeguard manual, and she's going to be talking specifically about conflict resolution. So if you feel that would be something that would be beneficial for you, just like you signed up under events for this webinar, next week, Monday, she is hosting a webinar, and she's going to be talking in depth about what's housed within this procedural safeguard manual. So here's my resources page. If you were here live, you should have had a link to every one of these shared with you. And we're at the end. So again, that feedback, when you give us feedback, then our grants are able to continue funding us, but also then they let us know if you have future ideas for webinars or resources that you as a parent would like. And finally, here is the information for Ask if you would need to get a hold of us in the future and how to do that. So I think Alicia will pop on here and let us know if there's any questions that have been put in chat.
I have not seen any questions come in yet, but we'll give everyone an opportunity right now. If you have questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat now. Sarah, thank you so much for this great presentation to help families understand how they can better participate as parents in their IEP meetings and in decision-making for their children. And then we will, just a reminder, we will email out the PowerPoint along with a link to the recording once it's finalized. Let's see, we did get one question come in. I don't know if this is a question you can answer, but one issue we have is that we believe our son needs more para-educator hours, but there is a huge para shortage in our district, so I'm afraid that we won't agree, that they won't agree because they can't. I don't want to be unreasonable. And Sarah, I'll let you speak to that.
That is a good question. So if the IEP team gets together and it is determined that that is a necessary service, then financial or staffing shortages are not a reason for that support not to be given. So go to the IEP team, have a discussion. If the team is in agreement, then sometimes there's maybe a need to hire somebody, there's maybe a need for that to happen, but there should not be a lack of services or supports simply because of resources or funds.
Thank you. All right, at this time, I don't see any additional questions. Again, if you would complete the feedback survey that Sarah mentioned, and we've mentioned several times, again, that just helps us collect the data we need to continue to receive our funding and be able to provide these resources to families and educators. At this time, we just want to thank everyone who jumped on today. Thank you so much for your attendance. We appreciate you attending the session, Parent Participation in IEP Decision Making, and we hope that you'll join us again. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We hope you have a great day.